Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm Times Herald sports editor Chuck Pollock, and of course, at this time of year, we're about halfway through the non-conference portion of the St. Bonaventure basketball schedules. This past week was a good one for both, and we'll talk about that today. First, with the man on my right, Jeff Madigan, who covers the Bona women for us, and on my left, J.P. Butler in his ninth season covering the Bona men. And in deference to gender, we'll talk to Jeff first. Jeff, I think when the season began, as it related to the Bona women, with the coach having left,
Right.
and with the players that were lost, we kind of saw this as a rebuilding year. But 7 games into the schedule, the Bonnies sit at 4-3, and I think in some ways they've maybe outperformed what we've expected.
Well, I mean, I don't think this is a year where we're looking at wins and losses.
Right.
I mean, it's tough because that's what sports are about, I guess, is the wins and losses. But for this team, it's all about getting better. This team isn't probably not going to do much this year, maybe not much next year either, but maybe in a couple of years from now, they'll get to be going on down the right path. But, you know, they're 4-3 through 7 games, so if you want to look at it in terms of quantity, wins and losses, so far so good. They're above 500. Now that might change tomorrow night when they get Bucknell coming here, and if they win, great. They're 5-3. All those games they've won in a row. If they lose, they're 500. And right now, all the best teams, in my opinion, are 500.
It's interesting to me that where the Bona women are right now has changed dramatically.
Okay.
When the season began, we lamented their lack of a point guard. Guess what's happened the last 4 games? It's impossible to look at this team and see the way Jalisha Terry has played the last 4 games and say, you know, there's their point guard for the next 4 years.
Yeah, she's been really good. She's going to be named Atlantic 10 Rookie of the Week, which is a really good honor for her and for the program in general. They didn't have a single Rookie of the Week last year, and I want to say Matea probably won at least one in her freshman year 2 years ago. Maybe Mariah Ruff did too. I'm going to look back after we're done here and see. But that's a great honor for her, and she's played great since the Delaware game. And if you want to look past Delaware, because they didn't do a lot there, down in Florida, Austin Peay, Ryder, and then this past Wednesday night against Stony Brook, she had 17 points, 4 assists, I believe. Just a great game for her. She's really coming along, and it's a thing that, you know, if you saw her even so far in the exhibition game against Edinboro and going into the season opener and things of that, her progression has been remarkable. I mean, she came into the Delaware game, I want to say averaging less than 2 points a game, and now she's up at 6.5. So she's really upped her scoring average 6-fold. She's been great.
It's really interesting, too, I think, that Jesse Fleming, a first-year head coach,
Right.
had the courage to put her in the starting lineup as soon as he saw she was on the upside. Now, all of a sudden, he's got 2 freshmen in the starting role, including Sarah Hart. And those 2 girls are tremendous additions because you can see such an upside. And it takes some courage to basically bench a senior, Imani Outlaw, and go with them and then see such quick results.
Well, that's what the head coach does. He's got to push the right buttons, and for the last 3 games at least, he's pushed the right buttons and gotten his team to 3 victories in a row. It hasn't been the prettiest of basketball, but St. Bonaventure women's basketball has not been known for its prettiness, I guess is the word you'd say for it. But if you have more points than your opponent at the end of the game, I think you did your job pretty well.
When you look at the last game, clearly Stony Brook was not the best of teams,
Right.
but here was a kind of a young, evolving Bona team playing basically in front in the second half of a men's crowd.
Right, yeah.
So there was a lot of exposure to pressure playing before a big audience, and Bona responded
Right.
well.
In my opinion, I think both teams, the men's and the women's team, really get up for those doubleheaders, especially the women's team, you know, because they're always, by the end of the game, you know, they're in front of 1,000, 1,500, up to 2,000 people, especially last Wednesday night, when by the time the Bona game, women's game was decided late in the 3rd quarter, 4th quarter, you started to get the men's crowd coming in. You know, in the men's game, you know, the men's team had that great game against Siena last week, and won the Franciscan Cup back. And I said the women haven't lost a doubleheader, I want to say, in at least 2.5, 3 seasons, and I bet the men's record is just as good. There's just something about doubleheaders playing at the Riley Center that gets both teams pretty jacked up. And it said these fans coming in, 1,500, 2,000 people. They're not all women's basketball fans, but they're watching the game and they're cheering on the Bonnies.
Final question. I'm sure in his heart of hearts, Jesse Fleming is disappointed at the losses to Niagara and Canisius,
Right.
but they came on merit. But they did go to Delaware and played tough against a pretty good team, and that was kind of the first inkling of where we are. Our thought is, as you head into the Atlantic 10 schedule, that's when the going gets tougher.
Right.
But tomorrow night, they're playing a Bucknell team that's awfully good. It's kind of a pre-Atlantic 10 test.
Exactly. And I think he's really disappointed with the Canisius game because they allowed 74 points and they lost it here at the Riley Center, the first loss at home in a season and a half. But yeah, I mean, the Atlantic 10 for them is going to be a really tough test. There's a lot of really good teams in the Atlantic 10 when A10 play starts on December 28th. But right now you got a good Bucknell team coming in here, and then you're going to go on the road this weekend, Eastern Michigan, Toledo coming back. You've got Albany next weekend. So this, UB after that. They were a tournament team last year. So was Albany. So you've got a lot of tough tests still to go in non-conference play. But that's the point, is to try to get better and better and play some of these tougher non-conference games at the very end so you're ready to go once you get into Atlantic 10 play.
We'll be back to talk to JB Butler about the Bona men's team after this. JP, it was a wonderful week for Bona basketball fans anyway, but particularly the men. 2 impressive wins over Siena and UB, and yeah, they're non-conference games, but those are 2 good teams and good tests, and the Bonnies won in impressive fashion, not necessarily by a big score, but by grit.
Yeah, and we talked about it after the UB game on Saturday, how this was just a good sign from this team, I think, at this point. They had 2 teams who were picked to finish pretty high in their league this year, who were really good last year, who will probably be, respectively, Siena in the Metro Atlantic and UB in the Mid-American Conference will probably be up there. So 2 tough teams at home, and they were able to take care of both. And I think one of the good things for Bona from that game is before that in Texas, they had those 2 games where they really just won going away. They blew out Central Michigan and Pepperdine.
Right.
Here were 2 games that it was really kind of a gut check situation for them where they had to make some plays at the end of the game. A lot of that same kind of game as last year, where they had to make a play at the end of the game to pull it out, and they did that in both of these 2 games. So you would have expected maybe them to win these games because they were at home, even though they were against good teams. And, they were pretty actual sizable favorites in both games. Siena, we know, started at 7 and then ended up actually close to double figures.
Right.
UB was close to double figures. So there was an expectation to win the game, but still it was a matter of taking care of business, which I think they did. And to me, it's they told us a little bit more about themselves after taking care of those 2 teams.
To longtime Bona fans, I think there's a dismissive view of Siena and UB, thinking of them from another era. Siena was picked number 2 in the MAC, MAAC.
Right.
And Buffalo very well could win the MAC. And possibly
they have 2 years in a row.
correct.
Already.
And so you could be looking there at an NCAA team and without probably their second best player. So these were 2 good tests for Bonnies. For the Bonnies, this is not something to be dismissive about.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of going back to what I was talking about last week. I wrote a story about the 2 different ways of sort of viewing this Bona season in the early going, because I think, again, there are a lot of people who want to immediately put the bubble tag on this team, looking at it as, okay, what do they have to do to be on the bubble already at Thanksgiving, having this conversation. And so you look at the Florida loss and you say that's tough because maybe they needed that big non-conference win, one that they didn't have last year. Or you look at the Arkansas Little Rock game, you say that's tough, that's a missed opportunity. Now they're in a position where they've got to win out in the non-conference in order to still be perceived as being on the bubble. And I think that's a lot of pressure that's hard to be doing in late November, early December. To me, it was a matter of, okay, they got the last 2 in Texas. Now they've got 2 teams who are pretty highly regarded in their conferences coming in to the Riley Center. Take care of those 2 games, get to 5-2, get on a little bit of a win streak here. Now they've won 4 in a row, and now see, where it kind of transpires from here, to just say that, okay, you have to win, these last 7, 8 games in the non-conference is a tough thing, when this is a team that hasn't just gone and won out, before. Even last year's team didn't just go and win out the rest of the non-conference. So to me, it's more of a step at a time right now, and the first step was taking care of those 2 teams. They did that. Again, great play by the backcourt in general, specifically Jalen Adams, who had 27 against Siena and then 29, a season high against UB, and was just fantastic against UB, and getting contributions from a lot of other guys we've seen in the last week too.
One thing that's interesting to me, we get kind of spoiled because we sit at midcourt in most cases with an elevated position and watch the game unfold, and we can see the video board. But the last 2 games, I sat in the end zone with some of the other writers, visiting writers, and that's an eye-opener, because you're under a basket and you get a sense for the intensity of the rebounding. And we've been kind of critical of the fact that maybe that's the area where Bona is vulnerable. But in 2 games against 2 teams that are really tough on the boards, they stood up pretty well.
Right. I think that's something that bodes well. Both Siena and UB were bigger than Bona, just bigger guys inside, longer. And that had been a little bit of an issue. 2 things that were more of an issue than I think Mark Schmidt wanted them to be was in terms of turnovers, which they've gotten better at. They're now, one of the highest rated teams in the league in terms of turnover margin, and, kind of in the middle of the pack, I think, assist to turnover ratio now. And rebounding, just given that their bigs aren't very experienced, and right now they're depending a lot upon their guards. They're depending a lot on Matt Mobley and Idris Taki to do a lot of their rebounding, which you don't normally see from the guard position. But, they lost the rebounding battle to Siena, but they were right there.
Right.
And with UB, I think, again, it was still close. They were still up. But I think the good thing for Bona in the early going is not only is their offense playing as well as it is right now, and they're basically 1/10 of a point off of leading the league in scoring. They're averaging over 83, 84 points a game. They're right up there in, 3-pointers per game, 3-point percentage, field goal percentage. They're getting a lot of contributors. One thing that really stood out to me from the UB game is they've got 5 leading scorers in that game, and their actual leading scorer, Matt Mobley, wasn't even one of them. So anytime you have a situation like that where you're still placing 5 in double figures. But then the other thing too now is that their rebounding margin, one thing that might have been sort of an issue with this team, they're actually in 5th or 6th in the league, right up there. A lot of that has to do with offensive rebounds. We know they're a pretty good offensive rebounding team.
Right.
The 2 things that probably have to improve the most going forward, I would say now, are the defensive rebounding, which they're lower in the league right now, and just defense in general. It's very easy to overlook the fact that they gave up 84 points to UB when they're scoring 90 and winning the game, and they've won a lot of these games, high-scoring games. But I'm sure Schmidt would prefer to be a little bit better than giving up 80 points in a lot of these games.
The next segment of Bona's schedule, and this is kind of a final thought, 1 road game against old nemesis Joe Pollock, back to the Niagara days. He's now at Hofstra. That's a Wednesday night game. Or Tuesday night game. And then on Saturday, UNC Wilmington comes to the RC. Those 2 games, again, will be good tests.
That's exactly right. And I'm just kind of sitting down to do the preview story for the Hofstra game tomorrow. The way I'm kind of shaping it is you had 2 tough teams who were picked, who were good last year, picked high in their conference again this year, in Siena, UB. 2 teams that are hovering close to that 100 mark. Siena is 107 right now. UB is 118 in the Ken Pomeroy rankings. And then here you have 2 more this week who are, again, picked to finish pretty high, both from the same conference this time around, the Colonial Athletic Association. UNC Wilmington, who Bona will have on Saturday, actually won the conference last year, played in the NCAA tournament. It was picked to win it again this year. That's going to be a really good test for Bona on Saturday. But first, Mahalik and Hofstra tomorrow, making the return trip out to Hempstead, New York from last year. I have to think that Bona, we'll see how much they admit this to me when I talk to them later today, is going to really want this game, almost a revenge game, because Hofstra came in here last year and beat the Bonnies on their home floor. And if you really want to look at it this way, Hofstra was a top 100 team last year. They were a top 75, 70 team last year. And if Bona had won that game at home, that might have been the game they needed to make the NCAA tournament last year. So I don't know if they'll acknowledge that, but I have to think that they've got revenge on their mind. Hofstra is probably not going to be as good as they were last year. Any Mahalik coach team is probably going to be pretty good, but they lost their two leading scorers, two guys that had come with Mahalik from Niagara, Wanye Green and Amin Tanksley, who both went over 20 in that Bona game last year. And so they've got some new guys they're depending upon this year, but they're still 6-3. They're always close, good games with Mahalik, so I don't think this is going to be a guarantee at all for Bona. But again, it would be a good win in a sense that they'd be going on a road, beating kind of a rival coach, beating a pretty good team on the road. Hofstra's at 173 right now, and then like I said, they come back on Saturday with the team that's the second highest rated team of any team they play in the non-conference, and that's UNC Wilmington, who is sure to give them a test on Saturday. So again, two big games, two big opportunities again this week. Let's see what they do with them and see where they're at when it's over.
We'll be back to talk about those two games next week with another edition of OTH Sports View.